Today on our Talks, we're going to be talking with Gary Golightly, the Bubbleman, a man who makes his living out of soap, air, bubbles, and philosophy. He's been charming children and parents all over the world, and now we're going to hear why he has been forever blowing bubbles.
Wait till you see. Oh yeah. Does this look like 100 soda can rings tied together with embroidery thread on a couple of ski poles from the thrift store? What is it now? Please do not touch this. It's very inexpensive. My name is Gary Golightly. I'm the world's only one-man bubble festival because in 19 years of making bubbles, I had to find a one-man bubble woman.
I was born in 1953, July 22nd, as a cesarean.
Okay, we are only 2 minutes away from bubble time because I'm the bubble man and you're not the bubble man yet. But are you going to pay attention? You're going to know how to do what I do when I'm through doing what I do, even though I'm never through doing what I do for you.
I was the oldest, firstborn, and then my mother had 5 girls, and I had 5 sisters, and I still have 4 sisters now.
Oh.
I never knew who my father was. So that was the search that began in my life, was wanting to know who my father was, but I never found out.
Oh yeah, that's gotta neat. How beautiful. What good bubble catchers. You're the best.
We lived in a duplex home, and as I remember, when my last sister was born, we had a fire.
Who wants to come under the umbrella?
And I wound up saving my sister's lives from this fire when I was a little kid. I was 6 years old, and I can tell you to this day, I can still see the headlines, Hero Brothers Save Sisters from Fire, and they had a photograph of me on a couch with my sisters next door. And then we lost that house because my mother couldn't pay the mortgage. We moved into a housing project, and there was lots of violence and there was drugs, but I wanted nothing to do with that. I was always on the outside, an outsider.
Do you see this line that I put on the ground right there? You can go over the line. But then you have to go back behind the line because I have a lot of bubble finalia here. Can you say bubble finalia?
My mother told me school was where they were going to give me a new brain. And so I had this fear that it was going to be a Frankenstein kind of thing. Oh no, I was so scared of school. But once I got there, I never wanted to miss it.
All right, request number 3. If anybody wants to blow me kisses, I'm keeping it.
I got encouraged in high school to do art, to work with my hands, and to paint, to draw, because I spent a lot of time by myself.
10,000 butterflies! Oh yeah! And there they grow. The children are only beginning to have good, clean fun. Who loves bubbles?
So the creativity, the imagination started working. I didn't have video games to play with. Then when I got to college, I was a theater major first for 2 years, but I was not getting the sense that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do something that someone else had never done before. Just about the time I'm ready to graduate, I had a one-man art show. I was painting, I was drawing, I was printing, I was doing all this, and I was going to be an art teacher. And for 2 years I taught art.
Catch the bubbles now!
I was teaching in the public school system, the American public school system. And it was more a challenge trying to get the children to pay attention and to try to get supplies and to really be dedicated to these kids. And what I was finding was I was spending more time talking with them as a therapist, as a counselor. And then I thought I'd love to be an art therapist, but I couldn't afford a master's degree. So I decided I'm going to have a yard sale, and I'm going from the East Coast to the West Coast. I'm just out of here. I was 25 years old, a quarter of a century. I hadn't been out of Massachusetts. I'm going to change my life. I told my mother and sisters, I'll see you in 2 years. I'm going to California. I was delivering a car across the country with the thought in mind, the one thought is I want to know who my father was. and I knew I had a grandfather in Wichita, Kansas. I arrived in Wichita, Kansas, and I stopped at a phone booth, and I looked up my grandfather's name, and there he was in the phone book, and his name was Ralph Hamlin. So I called this man, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "I'm at the corner of Maple and Johnson." And he said, "I live right at the end of Johnson Street." I'm like, "You're that close?" He goes, "I knew I couldn't sleep." So there I was. The next thing I know, we were hugging, and hello, I'm your grandson. That he hadn't seen me in, 25 years. He'd only seen me when I was just a little teeny baby. And I said, "Do you know who my father was?" And he said, "Your mother never told us." So I spent a couple of days with my maternal grandfather. I didn't have many relatives. I didn't know of any other relatives. I didn't have anyone on my father's side. I wanted to get out of Phoenix. And all I had was my dog, who had a backpack, and me. And we started hitchhiking, and there was this guy, a Canadian guy, and he had a car filled with aluminum cans. And I said, "Whoa, where'd you get all those?" He goes, "Oh, off the highways. I've been picking them up off the highways, eh?" He goes, "It's going to be some money." So he said, "You can get in the car, if you can fit in." And the dog is jumping around, cans are clanking everywhere. And I was like, "Yeah, okay." My butt was up against the windshield. And we finally made it to the recycling center, and the whole thing was worth $26. So he's got no back seat in the car. And I wound up staying with him, sleeping in the back of the car with my dog. So he said, "You want to help me with the recycling?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he brought me to a recycling center. And he jumped over the fence, and he threw the bags of can from one recycling center, and the next morning brought them to the other recycling center. And that's where he was really getting all these cans. And I said, "All right, I don't want to hang out with you anymore." I stuck out my thumb. A woman in a Beetle picked me up at 10 o'clock that night. And she was going from Chicago to Santa Barbara to break up with a boyfriend. We finally got to the boyfriend's house, because I got her whole life story and relationship. And she picked up a few things, and I wound up living with her boyfriend. The next thing I know, I'm living in this beautiful home in Malibu, dog sitting for this guy and house sitting. I was ready to leave this situation with the dog in the house after 2 weeks. I wanted to head for San Francisco, and I actually knew my grandmother was in Santa Cruz. So I put out my thumb, got my dog's backpack, and we hitchhiked. Wound up going all the way, got picked up by a guy, a cowboy kind of guy, who drove me all the way to Santa Cruz and dropped me off. I found my grandmother. This was the other part of my quest. "Hi, Grandma, I'm your grandson from 26 years ago." And she said, "Well, you and your dog can stay with me, but, you're not going to be allowed to stay too long." Because, so I said, "Oh, that's all right." And I went to a cafe. And believe it or not, another Volkswagen Beetle drove by, and guy rolled the window down and said, "Need a ride?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "What are you up to?" I said, "Oh, looking for a place to stay and a job." He goes, "Here, go talk to Tony." The next thing I know, I'm living on a 100-acre ranch. It turned out to be a place for therapists, group therapy for adolescents. And I said, "Well, okay, that's cool. I can do that." They had gardens there. It was all natural. It was really nice. And they did a lot of breathing work.
Request number 2. I need you to inhale only fresh air in this area. There are children here. There are people here.
Oh, well, I got to take a real big, deep breath through the nose.
That's why it was invented. A bubble like an elephant.
I was interested in this breathing work, but I didn't understand it quite well. And after a while, someone finally said, "Gary, your attitude needs to change a little bit. Find someone you trust and have a breathing lesson." So I found this kind of California astrologer, kind of herb guy. I said, "What is this breathing?" He goes, "Oh, you just breathe through your nose and everything's fine." So I had a lesson in this breathing work, and I was so transformed by that one lesson. I jogged like 10 miles on the beach, just breathing. I thought this was the most natural, freeing thing I ever experienced, along with affirmations or thinking, or otherwise raising the quality of your thoughts. So I would breathe, and you have images that would come up, and you would have to say an affirmation like, "It's safe for me to breathe," or The more I continue to breathe, the lighter I feel. So the next thing I know, I incorporated this breathing into my life, and I wound up for the next 7 years being a breathing teacher, giving lectures on breathing. And I wound up first going from California to Sierraville, to near Truckee, California, living on a 600-acre ranch where they practice this breathing underwater. I'm like, this is great. And I'm floating in hot springs and breathing, and people are coming from all over the world, and I'm teaching people how to breathe. And I met this Swedish girl. And she was one of these breathing teachers. And, oh, you must come to Sweden. It would be very wonderful. You know, we could work together, teach everybody how wonderful it is to breathe. So I said, okay.
Oh, yeah. And there they grow. Take the picture now.
But there I was. I had my ticket. I was on my way to Sweden, and I had my Swedish girlfriend. And, oh, boy, I was going to be the breathing teacher of the world. And I got there, and she was living with another guy.
Hey, sit down.
So I had to do a lot of breathing myself. And her mother said, this is a big problem for you. I said, yeah. She's living with another guy. She said, you can live with me.
Hey, sit down.
And my son has gone away to college, and you can help me paint my kitchen. And at least you must stay in Sweden. You just got here. So I said, okay. So I wound up painting a kitchen in this woman's apartment. And I went downstairs, and there was a guy that looked kind of familiar. And I said, do you speak English? Yeah. I said, weren't you in California at the springs where I was staying? He goes, yes, I was there. I said, yeah, you're the musician guy. Yeah, what are you doing? I said, well, Alice has a boyfriend, and I got to go, and I'm living with her mother, and I got to go somewhere else. I got to get out. He said, here, take this number and call this lady. And the next thing I know, I'm living on an island in the north of Sweden, and I am in heaven. And they did this breathing work there. And once again, I had people coming from all over the world to learn about breathing and how wonderful it is, integrating that with a book called A Course in Miracles. Now I put them both together, and that's all I wanted to do with my life. I'm going to teach A Course in Miracles, and I'm going to teach people how to breathe, and it's going to be the most wonderful world, and everybody will be happy.
Oh, yeah. That's gotta be plenty of bubbles. I feel like a pop star.
For almost 2 years, I was in Sweden, teaching people how to breathe, teaching about miracles, attitudinal healing, when I went on a little picnic.
Doesn't it look like a big flower? Doesn't it look like a guitar? Because I could be a pop star. A bubble man, bubble man. I really am a rock bubble man. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I'm riding a bicycle coming back from the picnic when all of a sudden a policeman on a motorcycle pulls me over. He pulls a gun on me and says, Stannar. I'm like, do you speak English? What do you do? What did I do? And this car comes streaming down the street. 2 more cops get out of the car. They surround me. And the other one's holding a gun on me. I'm like, who speaks English? They said, there's just been a bank robbery in town. I'm like, you don't think I didn't, not me. They said, you have to come with us. I said, okay, where can I take the bike? It's my friend's bike. Just put it in the woods. So I put the bike, and now they've got me in this jail, this little jail like Mayberry. Really, there was like only 4 cells, and I painted powder blue, and I'm sitting in this jail cell going, oh my God, am I in deep bubble trouble now? They came into the cell and they said, if you tell us where the money is, then you won't get 25 years. You only get 7 years. I said, I don't know where the money, I didn't take the money. And then they let me sleep there that night. I had to. The next day, they brought me into the interrogation room, and they had the lights on me, and they had the 2-way mirror, and they was like, did you take the money? I'm like, no, I didn't. I was on a picnic. What have you been doing here? I said, teaching people how to breathe like this, how to relax in situations, certainly like this. And they were holding my head, and they were turning me and saying, I'm waving in the mirror going, look, I'm not a bank robber, right? No. So they come into my cell, put me back in my cell, and they come back and they said, well, we have good news and bad news. The good news is You were not identified as a robber. We are very sorry. We made a very bad mistake. The bad news is you've been in Sweden for almost 2 years on a 3-month visa. We have to deport you." So I said, they said, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Seattle." I said, "Yeah, I've never been to Washington. I'll go to Washington." So they said, "All right, we'll fix your ticket." By this time, I am meditating a lot and I'm breathing a lot. And they did let me have my Course in Miracles, and I'm just like doing my lessons a lot. And eventually they would take me out for 1 hour a day, and I would go barefoot just to touch the earth again. It was so wonderful. Until finally, after 13 days, my flight was ready. They had to take me to Stockholm. They put me on a plane and they flew me all the way to New York. Thank you very much. And in New York, and I look at my plane ticket and I'm ready to change flights for Washington, and it says Washington, D.C. I'm like, I want to go to Washington, D.C. So I wound up cashing the ticket in, buying a one-way ticket on the Greyhound bus to Boston. And just perchance, I swear, a little red Volkswagen Beetle with a woman in it. "What are you up to?" I said, "Oh, I just got back from Sweden. I've been breathing with people and I'm looking for a place to stay." And she goes, "Well, we got a spare room at our group house there, so you can stay with us." And I moved in with this woman named Susan, and I was living in Boston, and I had an office, and I was teaching people how to breathe, and I was doing the Course in Miracle groups, when all of a sudden I saw a little sign on a tree, and it said, "Walk for Peace, call Jeff." So I moved out of my apartment, went on this 100-mile walk, which turned into 2,000 miles of walks. I was in New York City. I had told somebody I was on this peace walk, and he gave me a button that said, "Arms are for hugging." So I looked at the address in the button and I said, I ordered 1,000 of them. With the last bit of my money, I ordered 1,000 of these buttons. I put them on a vest, and I went out in New York City streets and I sold them off my vest. "Get your peace buttons while there's still peace." I was screaming it at the top of my lungs. And I was making some pretty good money. And then a guy was making bubbles across the street and selling this bubble wand. And I said, "Hey, I'll give you 10 buttons for one of those bubble makers." "Yeah, sure. All right there, button man." So I said, "Thank you, Bubble Man." And so we traded at the end of the final walk, the final peace walk in Florida, in Gainesville, Florida. I had a bubble maker that makes big bubbles. And I'm standing on a street corner by a duck pond. And I'm making bubbles for the people that are going home from work because everybody's looking so sad. I said, maybe I'd cheer them up with bubbles. And people literally were stopping around the pond watching me bounce these giant bubbles on a pond. And one of them called me over to his car, and I thought I was going to get yelled at for bubbling on the pond. And he said, "Do you do weddings?" I said, "I do now." "So what do you charge?" I said, $1,000 an hour with a $900 discount. He goes, "All right, I want you at my wedding." It turned out to be Lowell Thomas's granddaughter. A daycare teacher came over to me at the wedding and said, "Do you do daycare centers?" I said, "Yeah, sure." She goes, "We don't have much money." I said, "Well, what can you afford?" And she said, $30. I said, $30 for 30 minutes? Yeah, I could do that. So I went to her daycare center a couple of days later. One of the kids in the daycare center was the daughter of a photojournalistic teacher at the University of Florida who took my picture for the Gainesville Sun, got on the front page, making a 40-foot bubble with these children from all over the world, and that's how it began. I called the local children's hospital, and I said, "Hi, I like making big bubbles." I said, "I know it sounds silly. Could I make bubbles for the children in the hospital?" And they said, "Well, we don't have money." And I said, "I don't want any money. I would just, because they can't come to me, but I've got these great bubbles and I'd love to go to them." I said, "All I'd ask in return is if you ever get a picture, I'd love a copy." And they, sure enough, they got a picture of me making this bubble in this hospital. If you take the word impossible and you put an apostrophe after the I, it becomes I'm possible. And that's what I started feeling was I was on this journey to go from the impossible to the I'm possible. And then when I added the bubble, of course, it became I'm possible. And then I started making up bubble words. And for example, part of my program where I have the kids say, "I am love a bubble, I am Hug-a-Bubble.
Can you say the magical bubble words? I am Love-a-Bubble. I am Hug-a-Bubble. I am Adorable.
Behind all that is trying to teach self-esteem.
I am environmentally capable.
And then I go into my environmentalism and social responsibility and the resources on this planet and what our children are going to inherit.
Well, did you know that the biggest bubble in the world is the world? You know what's happening to Mother Bubble? She's running out of fresh air. Do you know why she's running out of fresh air? No, because of sports utility vehicles, but don't worry.
I use humor to get this message across. When I say the biggest bubble in the world is the world, I do it with humor because it really is like a bubble, this planet, and it's the children's planet.
Can you say recycle a bubble?
I am very much worried about what children are being exposed to these days with Gap, Old Navy, Nike, Disney, Nickelodeon, Nintendo, Teenage Mutant Ninja, Power Ranger, Barney, Beanie Baby, Teletubby, Barbados, Pokemon, V-Chips, Game Boy, and Xbox. All these computer toys, things with batteries, electricity, and computer game programs, things with artificial flavor and sugar, and getting kids hyped up.
0 batteries, 0 electricity, 0 computer game programs. See the 0.
I'm so happy to see it when the kids do go and do breathe through their nose. You know, because when I'll say take a deep breath and they go, I'll say, no, that's gasping. You breathe through your nose, you eat through your mouth. A hooligan, they break things and they try to change society that way. But I like to consider myself a fooligan. I am available for birthdays, weddings, divorces, daycare centers, schools, nursing homes, comedy picnics, grand openings, foreclosings, upgradings, downsizings, bar mitzvahs, unions, reunions, family reunions, fairs, festivals, flea markets, and I've done 3 funerals for children. My quip is to go with his misery and bring joy, even if it's lemon fresh. And I really did do a divorce too. I went to the hospital one day where my mother was, and I said, could I do bubbles for my mother in the hospital? And they said, sure. And they wheeled her out. And I said, Ma, this is what I do for a living now. I make bubbles. And she goes, well, you're making people happy, and that's why I raised you. This is my 19th year. 19 years. I bought that bubble device, and I tell you, just seeing a giant bubble to me is still amazing after all these years.
And then another bigger bubble, oh yeah, I get another bigger bubble.
6-pack rings. These are very, very bad for the environment. They make a beautiful bubble maker.
There's yours, and oh, thank you for being so patient and waiting so kindly for your bubble present.
There's no batteries, no electricity, and no computer game programs. And this is so simple and so fun and elegant in its own kind of way, but it's drastic plastic.
Oh yeah.
I love children. And I thought I was going to be a nuclear family kind of guy and have children and raise my own family, but there was another calling in me. I went to Poland, one of the poorest countries in Europe. And I went there for 10 days and I stayed for 4 years. The children of the world became my children. If it's one child in a grocery store that's crying, I'll run right over and blow bubbles for it and make it happy. Or if it's 250 kids at a camp, I love it. When I started traveling, there were 2 words that always stayed in my mind: trust and intuition. And the trust part was getting people to instantly like me and trust me.
Don't forget to disinfect. Okay, I think it's time for bigger bubbles. Better back up 5 steps, because wait till you see. Don't forget, back up a little bit more, thank you.
I became a performance art therapist. So I got to be an art therapist that I wanted to be, but it was with performance art. And I got to be the healing person I wanted to be, because, and the breathing part really made a lot of sense, because you could take a deep breath and blow a bubble, and that's the really good connection I made there. I'm reaching the age of 50 next month. All those decisions back then seemed to be the right decision, following that intuition. And you know, when somebody once said life is a river, you either go with the flow or you struggle. And one of the affirmations was, I'm willing to let go of struggle in my life. A bubble is so incredible to watch. A bubble, when it's still, you can see yourself reflected in it. And then you see that reflection upside down on the other side of the bubble. And that's something that's quite intriguing to try to figure out how it does that. Right now, you know, I want to be where there's so much trouble, like with refugees somewhere. Well, I want to be somewhere where I can help and build and bubble in the evening. I still want to make bubbles.
The tornado!
You know, I can never go anywhere anymore, ever again, without a bottle of bubbles. I will forever be blowing bubbles, believe you me.
I want to thank you on behalf of Art Talks, because you have proven that art talks, and I really want to thank you deeply for letting us come into your little cave and ask you some questions.
Oh, the pleasure's been all mine, and I hope you carry this with you somehow throughout the world, wherever this goes. I hope people pay attention. Something interesting is from Berkeley University. I heard from somebody. They mailed me and said, "Bo, man, we use these things in our laboratory, these racks to put our things in, you know. Could you make bubbles out of these?" And I can't wait. She said, "We've got about 200 more." And I, you know, emailed back, "Oh yeah, I would love these, because and I can already see how I'm going to use them. That how they're going to be in a checkerboard pattern, and what stick I'm going to put them on, and how they're going to look like a flag, and it's going to be collapsible and colorful and recyclable."